Hasan Piker says if you steal from the poor, you become rich. If you steal from the wealthy, you go to prison. And Clarence Thomas the Tank Engine says that Hasan is not wrong, and it's not even close, with this infographic, which shows that wage theft is a much larger category of theft than all other types of theft. I'm going to argue that there are two problems with this plot. First, it dramatically overstates wage theft. And second, it dramatically understates other types of theft. The plot was published in an online magazine called Current Affairs, and their source is a Reddit user who compiled data. The Reddit user explains in a comment that wage theft totals are based on this study of over 4,000 workers in New York City, LA, and Chicago. Let's follow the link. Here it is. The survey is published by a group called NELP, the National Employment Law Project. They're a labor advocacy group. And that matters because of how they conduct their survey. The authors want to get adult, frontline workers, meaning not a manager, someone like that, working in a low-wage industry. But this is kind of a hard-to-reach population through normal survey methods. So they start with a seed, people that they know in each of these three different cities, LA, Chicago, New York, to be surveyed, an initial set of population members to be surveyed, which we located through our contacts in each city. These seeds were then given a fixed number of uniquely numbered dollar bill coupons to pass on to other eligible population members. So they start with this seed and they say, can we survey you? And then after they've surveyed the people they know, they say, okay, invite other people to our survey. And my point is, if you're a labor advocacy or a worker advocacy group like NELP, maybe your contacts include low-wage workers who disproportionately have problems, and therefore your survey sample is going to be biased. We can tell their sample is non-representative because 39% of them self-identified as being foreign-born and unauthorized. So when they say there's $25 billion in minimum wage violations, companies are paying less than minimum wage, a lot of what this infographic means is illegal immigrant workers work for less than minimum wage. And because they're surveying these three big cities, they aren't getting farm or agricultural workers in their workers in the surveyed occupations. So again, unless you think 40% of the low-wage workforce, excluding agriculture and farm workers, are illegal immigrants, you just have to think this survey is non-representative. And they calculate minimum wage violations in a problematic way. What they do is they ask the respondent about the work week immediately prior to the interview. And they ask how many hours did they work that week and what were you paid? And then the surveyors calculate the hourly wage that the person working received. I say that this is a poor method because maybe you don't remember how many hours you actually worked last week, or what you were exactly paid last week. So it just seems fraught, or it seems like there's the potential for error or miscounting. And one thing they notice in the survey is that workers who are paid non-hourly in cash have a lot higher rate of minimum wage violations. So this would be like a construction worker who gets $80 a day for showing up, regardless how many hours he actually works. If you ask that guy, how many hours did you work last week? He might give you a number of hours that he thinks he worked or that he claims to have worked, and calculating from his daily rate to the hours claimed to work would get you a minimum wage violation. And by contrast, workers who were paid hourly by company check had a much lower minimum wage violation rate. Okay, I've spent a lot of time on wage theft and minimum wage violations. I still hope to talk about this other category briefly, but basically the other categories here are the data is collected in a similar way from the non-representative sample in these three cities, and then extrapolated to the US per year in a calculation that's not shown. But the data that the extrapolation is based on just isn't really reliable data. The other types of theft totals come from the FBI. Here they are. And the problem with this data is that it comes from individual police departments who collect and report this data. It's collected by the FBI and presented here. In other words, these numbers come at the end of a funnel. So think of a crime like shoplifting. In order for shoplifting to be represented here, it has to take place. The retailer has to notice it. They have to report it to the police have to record it. The police have to report it to the FBI, and then the FBI presents it here. And that's in contrast to the survey where they seek out workers who are known by the NELP, National Employment Law Project. They seek out workers and ask, how many hours did you work last week? And then they try to calculate minimum wage violations. In other words, here they're actively seeking out from vulnerable groups evidence of violations. And here it's just the opposite. They aren't actively seeking it out. So if we look at the first category here, larceny, and here in the FBI table, larceny includes shoplifting, nearly 1 million incidents of shoplifting. Capital One Shopping Research estimates retail revenue lost to external theft, $48 billion. Adjusting for inflation back to the 2012 number, that's $32.5 billion in 2012 dollars. In other words, larceny, one subcategory of larceny, this one, shoplifting, it's not even the biggest subcategory of larceny, should be the biggest rectangle by far, 32.5 billion compared to 23.2 billion. So it should be like the size of these two rectangles combined if we were to listen to the retailers in a similar way to the way that surveyors go out and ask employees to get information about wage theft. Is there a huge difference between what the FBI shows and what the surveyors or what the Capital One research shows for retail theft? Well, one answer comes from the National Retail Foundation, where they look into reporting and prosecuting retail theft. They write that the majority of retailers, 64%, say that they reported less than half of their store-related theft incidents to law enforcement, mainly because law enforcement did not respond when the retailers reported theft. That gets back to the funnel I was referring to earlier. Most retailers report less than half of retail theft, so retail theft just doesn't show up a lot in a table like this. And that's why it's bad to compare a kind of proactive survey of workers to FBI collated crime statistics. You're missing out on a huge amount of crime. So Hasan's not wrong, and it's not even close. Well, I agree it's not even close. Thanks for your time.